Amara Bennett had learned a long time ago that trust was a currency. You didn't hand it out for free. Amara's disciplined approach brought career success, but losing family support, Yiwon's workload, and a pending promotion strained childcare balance. They needed help. Real, consistent, daily help. Which meant they needed to hire a stranger and hand her the most important thing either of them had ever built. Which was exactly why the resume sitting on her kitchen island made no sense. 14 years of experience, she muttered, scrolling through the PDF on her tablet. 2 glowing references. Background check came back clean this morning. Then hire her, Yiwon said from the stove, where he was doing something with eggs that smelled better than it had any right to. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, the black ink on his forearms curling toward his wrists, disappearing under the fabric at the last second like it knew where the line was. I will hire her, Amara said. I'm just saying it's suspicious when someone's this perfect. You say that about everyone. I say that about everyone because everyone is hiding something. Yiwon turned, spatula still in hand, and looked at her the way he always did when she said something like that, like he was amused and a little bit proud and not going to admit either one. Not everyone, he said. You had a rap sheet, longer than my arm when we met. And you married me anyway. I did my due diligence first. She smiled without looking up. Took me 8 months. From the living room came the unmistakable crash of blocks meeting hardwood, followed by a giggle that meant no one was hurt and everyone should be worried anyway. Micah, Amara didn't even raise her voice. What did we say about the bookshelf? Not a ladder, came the cheerful, unbothered reply. Yiwon was already moving, eggs forgotten, because some things came before breakfast. Amara watched him go, watched the transformation that happened every single time, the way a man who could silence a room full of grown men with one look turned into absolute putty the second his son said his name. She'd married 2 different people, she sometimes thought, and she loved them both. The doorbell rang at 9 sharp. The woman on the porch was exactly what her resume had promised. Mid-30s, warm brown eyes, a cardigan that looked soft and lived in rather than expensive and new. She had a large canvas tote slung over one shoulder, the kind with a dozen keychains clipped to the strap, little charms that caught the light and made a soft, tinkling sound when she moved. Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Choi. She extended a hand to each of them in turn, her grip firm but not aggressive. I'm Renata. Thank you so much for having me. Come in, Amara said. Micah, come say hi. Micah barreled around the corner at full toddler speed, skidded to a stop at the sight of a stranger, and then, as 3-year-olds do, completely forgot to be shy the moment he spotted the bag. Ooh, he pointed. Jingle. Renata laughed, crouching to his level without hesitation. You like the jingle. Go ahead, you can touch it. He reached for one of the keychains, a small enamel star, and gave it a delighted shake. He's beautiful, Renata said, straightening up. How old? 3 in October, Amara said, already softening, already doing the thing she'd promised herself she wouldn't do, which was fall for the easy warmth of a stranger before the paperwork had even settled. Yiwon said nothing. He watched. He always watched first and talked later, a habit from another life that he'd never quite been able to leave behind, not even here, not even for something this small. His eyes moved from Renata's face to her hands to the bag on her shoulder and back to her face again. Nothing about her registered as wrong, but nothing about her registered as fully right either. Some people were an open book. Some people were a closed one. Renata felt like a book with the cover glued shut. He decided it was nothing. New environment. Nerves. He'd felt the same way meeting Amara's parents the first time, and look how that turned out. Come in, he said finally. Let's talk. The interview went well. Better than well. Renata answered every question with the easy fluency of someone who'd done this 100 times. Nutrition schedules. Nap routines. What to do if a toddler swallowed something he shouldn't have. Stay calm. Call poison control. Don't induce vomiting unless instructed. She had a first aid certification. She had, she said, worked with 2 families over the last 6 years, both of whom had provided glowing written references. Would you mind if I called them directly? Amara asked. Just for my own peace of mind. Of course, Renata said, without a flicker of hesitation. Though I should mention, the Hendersons moved to Portugal last spring, so there might be a time difference issue getting through. And the Ortiz family, I believe, is currently traveling. I can give you their information, but response time might be slow. It was a small thing, a perfectly reasonable thing. Families moved. Families traveled. But Amara filed it away anyway, the way she filed away every small thing in the part of her brain that ran quietly in the background, no matter how charming the person across the table was. Micah, meanwhile, had not moved from beside the tote bag once during the entire conversation. He'd pulled it closer to his spot on the rug, both arms wrapped around it like a stuffed animal, occasionally giving one of the keychains an affectionate shake. I'm so sorry, Renata said, laughing softly. He can put that down whenever you'd like. He's fine, Amara said, smiling at her son. He loves anything with sound. She had no idea how right, and how wrong, that sentence was about to become. That night, after Renata left, Amara found Yiwon standing at the living room window, still holding the resume, turning it over like it might reveal something new on the second read. You're doing the thing, she said. What thing? The thing where you go quiet, and your face does absolutely nothing, which somehow means you're thinking very hard about something. He set the resume down. She's good. Too good, maybe, for what the job pays. People who are that good usually have somewhere better to be. Or they have a reason to want somewhere quiet, Amara said. Somewhere no one's watching too closely. Or that, he looked at her, you want to hire her anyway. I want to give her a chance, Amara said. Everyone deserves one, even the people who make us a little nervous. Especially them, sometimes, because being nervous isn't the same as being right. Yiwon didn't answer right away. In another life, in another version of himself, nervousness had been a signal he acted on immediately, without waiting for proof, and people had gotten hurt for less than what he was feeling now. He had promised himself, the day Micah was born, that this house would run on patience instead of instinct, that he would be the kind of father who waited for the truth instead of assuming the worst of it. Give her the chance, he said finally, but we keep our eyes open. We always do. Renata started the following Monday. The first 2 weeks were, by any measure, a success. Micah adored her. He asked for her at breakfast and cried, briefly and dramatically, on the one day she called in sick. Renata kept the house running with an efficiency that made Amara's mornings smoother, and Yiwon, who trusted almost no one with his son, began slowly to trust her too. But the bag never left her side. It sat beside her on the porch swing during outdoor play. It hung from the back of the kitchen chair during lunch. It came upstairs during nap time and sat, unopened, on the floor beside the rocking chair while she read Micah his books. And every single time anyone got too close to it, something in Renata's face changed. It was subtle. Amara almost missed it the first time, a tightening around Renata's eyes when Yiwon reached to move the bag off a chair so he could sit down. I'll get it, Renata said, too quickly, already moving to intercept. Sorry, it's got some fragile things in there, breakable stuff from my mother. No trouble, Yiwon said, watching her hands as she lifted the bag herself, cradling it against her chest like something that might shatter, or something that might spill. He said nothing to Amara that night. Not yet. He'd learned over many years and in a very different context that suspicion without evidence was just noise, and noise made people sloppy. Better to watch. Better to wait. But he moved the baby monitor in the living room 3 inches to the left, so that its camera had a slightly better angle on the couch, where the bag usually sat. The following week, Amara ran into an old college friend, Priya, at the farmer's market. Micah perched on her hip, inspecting a peach, with intense scientific interest. How's the new nanny working out? Priya asked. You said you were nervous about hearing. She's wonderful, actually. Micah adores her. That's the vibe I'm getting, Priya said, nodding at Micah, who had abandoned the peach and was now trying to explain, with great seriousness and very few actual words, the concept of jingle bag to a stranger's dog. You did the whole background check thing, right? Credit criminal the works. Every box checked. Good, my sister didn't once. Long story. Turned out fine in the end, but it scared her half to death first. Priya shrugged. You can never really know somebody until something forces the truth out, though. That's the scary part. Paper only tells you what people want it to say. Amara laughed it off at the time. She thought about it again 3 separate times that week, at moments she couldn't quite explain to herself. Micah's fascination only grew. He started asking about it by name, bag, first thing every morning, the way other kids asked for a specific stuffed animal or blanket. He carried it, when Renata would let him, dragging it across the living room floor with both hands, the keychains clinking a soft, cheerful rhythm against the hardwood. At the park that Saturday, he refused to go down the slide until the bag had been placed, ceremoniously, at the bottom to watch. He's decided it's a member of the family, Amara said, laughing despite herself, watching Renata retrieve the bag for the 3rd time after Micah insisted on relocating it closer to the swings. Kids get like this, Renata said, and her laugh was warm, easy, entirely convincing. My little cousin used to do the same thing with a TV remote, wouldn't nap without it in the crib. That's sweet. It was until the batteries came out in his mouth once. Learned my lesson fast. Renata scooped the bag up again, holding it slightly away from her body this time, angled so the zipper faced inward, toward her own hip instead of outward toward the world. Amara didn't notice the positioning. Yi-Won, watching from the bench with his sunglasses on, did. He said nothing. He simply filed it away, the way he'd filed away everything else, small, deliberate movements that meant nothing on their own, but were beginning, together, to look like a pattern. One night, after Renata had gone home, Micah refused to settle for bed without the bag in the room. A first, since it had never left with Renata for the night before, but this time she'd left it, forgotten, on the hallway bench while rushing to catch a bus. No bag, no seppi, Micah announced from his crib, arms crossed with the absolute authority of a toddler negotiating from a position of total power. The bag isn't a toy, baby, Amara said, crouching by the crib rail. It's Renata's. She'll bring it back tomorrow. Bag, now. His lower lip trembled with the particular tragedy of a 3-year-old denied. In the end, Yi-Won brought it in and set it, unopened, in the corner of the room, well out of reach, just close enough to satisfy the demand. Micah settled almost instantly, one arm dangling contentedly over the crib rail in its general direction, and was asleep within minutes. Yi-Won stood over the bag a moment longer than necessary before he switched off the light. He didn't touch it. He didn't open it. But he looked at it the way he used to look at things in his old life that didn't add up, filing away one more small detail. It was heavier, sitting on the floor, than a bag of that size should have been for a woman who claimed there was nothing inside but snacks and spare diapers. The next morning, Amara almost said something directly. She'd rehearsed it in her head on the drive to drop off dry cleaning, something light, something easy, just a passing comment to see how Renata reacted. You really do love that bag, huh? Micah's not the only one attached to it. But when the moment came, standing in the kitchen while Renata packed Micah's snack bag for the park, the words didn't come out the way she'd planned. Renata was laughing at something Micah had said, swinging him gently by the hands, utterly present, utterly warm, and Amara found herself thinking, not for the first time, that she must be imagining things. That a good nanny who was overprotective of her belongings was not, by itself, a crime. That some people were simply private, and privacy wasn't the same as guilt. She said nothing that day either. It would be almost 2 weeks before she'd wish, quietly, that she had. He's never been like this about an object before, Amara said one evening, watching the monitor feed on her phone while Yi-Won read beside her in bed. Not even his blanket. Kids get fixated, Yi-Won said. Micah got fixated on the vacuum cleaner for a month, screamed every time we turned it off. This feels different. You've said that about a lot of things this month. Amara set her phone down and looked at her husband properly. You've noticed it too. Don't pretend you haven't. You've been watching her like she stopped herself. Like she's what? I don't know. Like she's a person you used to be worried about, back when you had reasons to worry about people. Yiwon was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and somewhere down the hall, the monitor picked up the soft sound of Micah shifting in his sleep. I don't have proof of anything, he said finally. I have a feeling, and feelings without proof get people hurt who don't deserve it. So what do? We watch, we wait. We don't accuse a woman of anything because she's protective of her handbag. He reached over and turned off the lamp. But we don't stop watching either. A few days later, Amara nearly moved the bag herself. It was sitting, as usual, on the kitchen chair, and she needed the chair, and Renata was upstairs running Micah's bath. Amara reached for the strap without thinking twice. It was, after all, just a bag, and had actually lifted it an inch off the seat when Renata's voice came from the top of the stairs, sharper than Amara had ever heard it. I've got it. Renata came down 2 steps at a time, damp-handed from the bath water, and took the bag gently but firmly from Amara's grip before she'd even fully processed what was happening. Sorry, Renata said, breathless, already recovering her usual soft smile. I don't like anyone lifting it by that strap. It's older than it looks. I'm always scared it'll tear. Of course, Amara said. No trouble. But she noticed, later, replaying it in her mind, that Renata hadn't come downstairs because the bag was in danger of tearing. She'd come downstairs because someone besides her had touched it at all. The reference calls, when Amara finally got through to one of them, went fine. Better than fine. A woman named Mrs. Ortiz spoke glowingly for almost 10 minutes about Renata's patience, her creativity, how much her own children had loved her. She was with us almost a year, Mrs. Ortiz said, her voice warm and unhurried over the line. My youngest still asks about her. She had this way of making bath time feel like an adventure, boats, little songs, the whole production. I was sad to see her go, honestly, but she said she needed to relocate for family reasons. Did she ever mention where she was relocating to? Somewhere on the East Coast, I believe. She wasn't specific, and I didn't push. Some people don't like talking about family business, and I respect that. Of course, Amara said, and you'd recommend her without reservation. Without a single one. Honestly, if you're lucky enough to have her, hold on to her. It should have put Amara's mind at ease completely. Instead, one detail stuck, small and strange, lodged somewhere she couldn't quite shake. Mrs. Ortiz had referred to Renata at one point as Rebecca. Sorry, did you say Rebecca? A pause on the line. I'm so sorry, it's been a long day. I meant Renata, of course. Amara let it go. People misspoke. People had long days. She told herself that 3 times on the way to bed that night, and she almost believed it. She mentioned it to Yiwon anyway, because that was the deal they'd made a long time ago. No secrets between them, not even the small, silly-sounding ones. She called herself Rebecca, he repeated, or Mrs. Ortiz called her Rebecca. Mrs. Ortiz did. Renata corrected it fast, said she'd had a long day. Yiwon was quiet for a moment, turning a glass of water slowly on the counter. People slip on nicknames. Old roommates, old boyfriends, sometimes people just call you the wrong name because you remind them of someone else. He looked up. But it's the kind of thing worth remembering, not acting on, remembering. You keep saying that, remembering, not acting. Because the two are different. And mixing them up is how good people ruin other people's lives over nothing. He set the glass down. I've seen it happen. Men I respected, acting on a feeling instead of a fact, and by the time the fact caught up, there was no fixing what they'd already broken. Amara reached over and took his hand. You don't talk about that life very often. I don't need to. It taught me what I needed to learn, and now I get to just be his father instead. He nodded toward the ceiling, toward Micah's room, where the monitor was picking up the soft, static hush of a sleeping toddler. That's a good trade. They sat with that for a while, the kitchen quiet around them, the small mystery of a mispronounced name tucked away for later, unresolved but not forgotten. a loose thread neither of them pulled yet, because neither of them yet knew how much was attached to the other end of it. 3 weeks in, on a Thursday afternoon that started like every other afternoon, everything changed. Micah was playing in the living room while Renata folded laundry in the next room, close enough to hear him, far enough to give him space, exactly as she'd always done. The bag sat on the floor by the armchair, exactly where it always sat. Micah, mid-play, decided the bag needed to come with him to the fort he was building under the coffee table. He grabbed the strap with both hands and pulled. The bag was heavier than he expected, heavier, in fact, than a diaper bag or a purse of that size had any reason to be, and it dragged rather than lifted, scraping across the hardwood floor. One corner caught on the leg of the side table. Micah, undeterred, gave it a determined toddler strength yank. The zipper, already strained from being opened and closed 100 times a day by small, careless hands, gave way. It didn't burst open dramatically. It simply split, a few inches at first, then further as the weight of the bag's contents pulled the rest of the seam apart. For one long second, nothing happened at all. The bag simply sagged open on the rug, its mouth gaping, and Micah stared into it with the mild, curious disappointment of a toddler who'd expected a toy and found only boring grown-up paper. Then the papers slid. They came out slowly at first, a few loose sheets sliding down the widening gap in the seam, and then all at once, a small avalanche spreading across the hardwood in a fan of white and cream and laminated plastic. A driver's license spun once and landed face up near the leg of the coffee table. A rubber band gave way, and a thick stack of folded documents fanned open like a deck of cards. Micah, delighted by the sudden mess, clapped his hands. "Bag broke," he announced to no one and everyone. From the next room, something in Renata's rhythm, the steady, unhurried fold of laundry, stopped completely. "Micah." Renata's voice cracked across the room like something breaking, sharper and more frightened than either Amara or Yiwon had ever heard it. She dropped the shirt she'd been folding and moved so fast she knocked over the laundry basket, scrambling toward the papers scattered across the rug. But Yiwon was already there. He didn't shout, he didn't grab her. He simply stepped, quietly and completely, into the space between Renata and the papers on the floor, and he did not move. "Please," Renata said, and her voice had changed entirely now, all the warmth gone out of it, replaced with something raw and cornered. "Please, just let me, those are private, they're just old bills, let me." "Sit down," Yiwon said, not loudly. He never needed to say things loudly. "Amara, take Micah upstairs." Amara was already moving, scooping her son up off the floor before he could reach for a single fallen paper, murmuring nonsense reassurances into his hair as she carried him toward the stairs. Micah, blessedly, sensory overloaded but entirely unaware that anything was wrong, twisted in her arms to look back at the mess. "Bag broke," he informed her solemnly. "It's okay, baby, it's okay." She did not let go of him until they were 2 rooms away. Upstairs, in the safety of Micah's room, Amara sat on the floor with her back against the crib, her son in her lap, and simply held him while her heart slowed down. Micah, unbothered, patted her cheek. "Mama sad." "No, baby, Mama's just holding you for a second." "Bag broke," he reminded her, in case she'd forgotten. "I know, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong." She kissed the top of his head and meant it completely. Meant it in a way she'd repeat to herself many times over the coming days, because some small, irrational part of her worried, the way mothers worry about things that were never their fault, that she should have seen this coming sooner. That she should have protected him from ever being anywhere near whatever truth was spilled out across her living room floor. But he was fine. He was already reaching for a stuffed elephant, already forgetting, the way 3-year-olds mercifully forget almost everything that isn't a snack or a nap. Downstairs, the silence had a different texture entirely. What was on the floor did not look like old bills. There were laminated cards, a driver's license with Renata's photo and a different name, a social security card, employment records from families whose names did not match the Ortiz or Henderson she'd claimed. A folder of documents with government letterhead, the kind that took real effort, real criminal effort, to forge convincingly. Yiwon crouched slowly and did not touch a single page. "You don't need to say anything," he said, to the woman now sitting frozen on the floor amid the wreckage of her own bag. "But I want you to understand something clearly so there's no confusion later. My son found this by accident. He is 3 years old and he likes shiny things, and none of what happens next has anything to do with him. It has to do with you." "I can explain." "You can," he agreed, "to them." "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Renata said, quietly, more to the floor than to him. "I know that doesn't mean anything now. I was good at this job. Whatever else you think of me, I was good with him. That part was real." "I believe you," Yiwon said, and he meant it, which surprised him even as he said it. "It doesn't change what happens next." She nodded once and didn't try to explain anything else. Amara was already on the phone, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her, giving their address to a dispatcher with the same clean precision she used to close 7-figure deals. Renata, whose name, it would turn out over the following days, was not Renata at all, but a woman named Marisol Diaz-Whitfield who had been using stolen identities to secure childcare positions in 3 different states for the better part of 6 years, did not run. There was nowhere, really, to run to. She sat on the living room floor surrounded by the evidence of a life built on paper that wasn't hers, and she put her face in her hands, and she waited. "Queens, I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is the part of the story where it would be easy to make her a monster. But real people are rarely monsters. They're just people who made choices over and over until the choices became a cage they built themselves. That doesn't excuse what she did. It just means the truth is heavier than a villain would be." The 2 officers who arrived 20 minutes later found a scene that was, by their own later admission, unusually calm for what it was. No shouting, no struggle. Just a man standing quietly beside a stack of scattered documents, a woman sitting motionless with her hands in her lap, and a mother upstairs murmuring nursery rhymes to a toddler who had already moved on to more important matters, namely his stuffed elephant. "Sir, we're going to need you to step back so we can secure the area," the younger officer said, glancing at Yiwon with the particular wariness of someone who'd clearly heard the name Choi somewhere before and was trying to place it. "Of course." Yiwon stepped back immediately, hands visible, voice even. "Everything on the floor is hers. Nothing has been touched since it fell. My wife called this in the moment we saw it." The older officer crouched down, surveying the documents without touching them yet, and let out a low breath. "That's a lot of paper for someone who packs light." Marisol said nothing. She had stopped trying to explain anything the moment Yiwon told her, gently, that whatever she had to say now belonged to people with badges, not to him. The investigation moved quickly once it started. Detectives confirmed within 48 hours that Renata Cole had never existed as a legal identity, that the woman using the name had stolen the credentials of a real nanny who'd once worked in another state, built a paper trail around them, and used that borrowed life to move from family to family, collecting paychecks under a name that was never hers to use. The Hendersons and Ortizes she'd referenced had been real families, but the glowing reviews had come from an accomplice posing as a former employer, coached carefully on what to say and what not to. It might have worked for years longer, if a toddler hadn't wanted to play with a bag that jingled. She would have kept moving, the detective told Amara over the phone 2 days later. Family to family, it's a pattern we've seen before: steal an identity, work a job for a few months to a year, leave before anyone digs too deep, repeat somewhere new. Your son just happened to break the cycle. How long had she been doing this? Best we can tell, on and off for about 6 years. Different names each time, built off real people's stolen paperwork, sometimes people who'd passed away, sometimes people who just weren't paying close attention to their own records. She was careful. Careful people are the ones who last the longest before anyone catches on. And the references, the families she said she'd worked for. Real families, real jobs, some of them she did work those positions, under those names, for a while. The glowing reviews weren't invented out of nothing. That's what made it work as long as it did. Most of what she told you wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't attached to her real name or her real history, which included 2 prior fraud charges under 2 other identities entirely. Amara pressed her fingers to her temple. So there's no way we could have caught this in a normal background check. Honestly, not easily. Standard checks run against the name and social security number provided. If both of those are stolen but internally consistent, meaning they match each other correctly, the system doesn't flag anything. It looks clean because, on paper, it is clean. Just not clean for the person standing in your kitchen. It was, Amara thought after she hung up, the single most unsettling sentence anyone had said to her in weeks. Not because it was cruel, because it was true, and there had been no way, none at all, for her diligence to have caught something built that carefully. Amara sat with that for a long moment after she hung up. She thought about the interview, the clean background check, the glowing references that had, on the surface, checked every box she knew to check. She thought about how certain she'd been, how thorough she'd felt, and how none of it had been enough. Yi-won found her sitting at the kitchen island that evening, the same island where the resume had sat weeks earlier, looking flawless. "I did everything right," she said quietly. "I checked everything, and it still wasn't enough." "You checked the paper," he said, sitting beside her. "Paper can be built. It takes time and money and patience, but it can be built by anyone determined enough to do it." "Then what's the point of checking anything?" "The point," he said, "is that paper isn't the only thing you check. Next time, we don't just call the references on the resume. We verify the references exist independently, public records, licensing boards, people who don't just vouch for someone but can prove they've known them for years. It's more work. It should have been the standard from the start." He paused. "I should have said something sooner. I felt it before you did." "Why didn't you?" "Because a feeling isn't proof, and I've watched men destroy innocent people over feelings that turned out to be nothing." He took her hand. "But I'll tell you the feeling next time, even if I'm wrong. I'd rather be wrong out loud than right in silence." Amara let out a long breath, the first one, it felt like, that had come easily in days. I keep replaying the interview, the way she looked us in the eye, the way Micah loved her instantly. I trusted my read on people, and my read was wrong. "Your read wasn't wrong," Yi-won said. "She really was warm. She really was patient with him. None of that was fake. I watched her with Micah for 3 weeks, and whatever else she was lying about, she was gentle with our son every single day. That part was true. It's just that a person can be 2 true things at once, kind to a child and dishonest about everything else. People aren't usually all one thing." "That's a very generous way to look at the woman who lied to our faces for a month." "It's not generous. It's just accurate." He turned his glass slowly on the counter. "It doesn't mean she isn't accountable. It means the world is more complicated than villains and heroes, and if we only ever look for obvious villains, we'll miss the complicated ones standing in our kitchen." Amara was quiet for a while, absorbing that. "What do we tell Micah? When he's older, I mean, if he ever asks about the nanny who broke her bag?" "The truth, in a version he can carry, that some people don't tell the truth about who they are, and that it's not his job to catch them, it's ours. That his job is just to be a kid who notices shiny things and jingling bags, and that being curious is never something to apologize for." Yi-won reached over and covered her hand with his. "He didn't do anything wrong. He did something right, completely by accident, and we get to be the parents who make sure he never carries any weight for that." Upstairs, faintly, they could hear Micah singing to himself in his crib. Some tuneless, happy nonsense song about jingles and blocks and his father's shoes, utterly untouched by the storm that had passed through his living room 3 days earlier. That, in the end, was the only outcome that had ever really mattered. The 3 weeks between Marisol's arrest and the first new interview were quieter than any 3 weeks the house had seen in a long time. Amara took a leave from client calls she didn't strictly need to take. Yi-won worked from the kitchen table instead of his office, close enough to hear Micah's footsteps at all hours. Neither of them said it out loud, but both of them were, in their own way, standing guard. They interviewed 4 candidates. Amara built a new checklist for each one, not just calling references, but verifying the references were licensed professionals with independently searchable histories, cross-referencing employment dates against public records, and asking every former employer the same blunt question. Is there anything about this person you'd want to know if our positions were reversed? 2 candidates were perfectly fine and simply not the right fit. One had a discrepancy in her stated years of experience that turned out to be an honest resume error, caught and clarified in a single follow-up call. It was, Amara thought, exactly the kind of small, boring inconsistency that should exist in any honest person's paperwork. The kind that cleared up in 5 minutes instead of unraveling into something worse. The 4th candidate was Denise. 3 weeks later, a new nanny stood on the same porch. Her references checked out on paper, and beyond it. Amara had called 2 former employers directly, verified through public licensing records that she held the certifications she claimed, and spoken to a former colleague who hadn't been on the reference sheet at all. Just someone Amara had found through a professional networking site and asked, point blank, "Is there anything I should know?" There wasn't. Denise was simply exactly who she said she was, a woman with an unremarkable, well-documented decade of childcare work, 3 verifiable references who'd known her for years rather than months, and not a single detail that required Amara to take anything on faith alone. Micah, predictably, was fascinated by her sunglasses, which he informed her were cool, no less than 6 times in the first 10 minutes. He did not notably try to hug her bag. It was small, practical, plain, no keychains, no jingle, nothing for a 3-year-old's curiosity to latch onto. Amara noticed and said nothing, and felt something in her chest loosen just slightly anyway. Later that evening, the 3 of them sat together on the back porch, Amara, Yiwon, and Micah wedged between them working determinedly on a plate of orange slices, and nobody said very much at all. They didn't need to. The quiet itself was the point. A house that had held its breath for 3 days had finally started breathing normally again. "Dada," Micah said, holding up an orange slice like a trophy. "Look." "I see it," Yiwon said, and took the offered slice with the same gravity he'd have used accepting a diamond. Amara watched the 2 of them and thought about currency again, about trust, about how you earned it, about how sometimes even the most careful person in the room could be wrong, and the people who loved you would still be standing there when the truth came out, ready to help you clean up whatever was left. "You're doing it again," Yiwon said, without looking up from the orange slice. "Doing what?" "Thinking so loud, I can hear it from over here." Amara smiled despite herself. "I was just thinking that a few weeks ago I would have told you paperwork was the whole answer. Background checks, references, credentials. Now I think it's maybe 40% of the answer." "What's the other 60? "Paying attention to the small things, to the way somebody flinches when you touch their bag, or corrects a name too fast, or never quite lets you meet the people who tell you the truth about them." She looked at her son, who had abandoned oranges entirely in favor of stacking the empty plate on his own head like a hat. And apparently, having a 3-year-old who thinks everything interesting deserves a hug. "That last one's the most reliable system we've got," Yiwon said, and for the first time in weeks, he actually laughed, a real one, low and warm, the kind that Micah heard and immediately tried to copy with his own delighted, nonsensical giggle, plate still balanced precariously on his head. The evening settled around them, orange gold and unhurried, the kind of ordinary hour that only felt precious because they knew, now, exactly how easily it could have gone another way. Some things you verified with paperwork. Some things, it turned out, you verified with love, patience, and a toddler who noticed what nobody else did. Later, after Micah had been carried up to bed, and Denise had gone home for the evening, Amara stood at the kitchen island one more time, the same spot where a resume had once looked flawless, where a name had once been mispronounced over the phone and dismissed as nothing, where a bag full of secrets had once sat on a chair like it belonged there. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked. "Marisol." Yiwon considered the question honestly, the way he considered most things. "Sometimes, I think about how much effort it must take to build that many versions of yourself and keep them all straight. That's its own kind of exhausting life. I don't wish her harm. I just don't want her anywhere near my son again. The detective said she'll likely serve time. Fraud, identity theft, multiple counts. Then the truth caught up to her the way it eventually catches up to everyone. He reached over and turned off the kitchen light. That's not on us to carry. Our part was just making sure it happened somewhere else, to someone else's family, never again. Amara nodded and let it go, really let it go, this time, in the way she hadn't quite managed to on the night the bag first tore open. Upstairs, the house was quiet, full of the specific, settled peace that came after a storm had fully passed. Tomorrow there would be orange slices again, and sunglasses commentary, and a toddler discovering some new ordinary object to declare fascinating. That was the whole, unglamorous, precious point of it.